Good afternoon and welcome to today's Drugstore News webinar entitled The 2014 Cosmetics Industry Study, which is being sponsored today by the TABS Group. I'm Rob Eder, Editor-in-Chief of the Drugstore News Group, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today on today's webinar. We're expecting a very engaging discussion today over the next hour or so with the folks at the TABS Group. They're experts in consumer analytics, and they're going to be taking a hard look at the cosmetics business today to see who buys, where they buy, and how much they buy. Today we'll look at the importance of department stores, the specialty beauty channel, internet, and in-home sales versus traditional food, drug, and mass stores. We'll also take a look at some current trends such as the emergence of BB and CC products, as well as some nail salon trends that are occurring. But before we start, I'd like to make a few brief housekeeping points. First, for a better viewing experience, we recommend using the webcast window in full screen mode. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. You can post questions through your screen at any time during the webinar, and they'll be answered at the end of the presentation. If we happen to run out of time before we get to all of your questions, our presenters will answer your questions directly via email. Finally, if you miss any portion of the presentation today, you can view the on-demand version at drugstorenews.com. Now let's get started. Our speakers for today's webinar are TABS Group CEO and founder Dr. Kurt Jetta and EVP and partner David Butcher. Dr. Jetta founded the TABS Group in 1998 with a mission of delivering analytical innovations that simplify and improve the way business analysis is conducted in the consumer products industry. The company has grown revenue by double digits every year since its inception. Dr. Jetta is a frequent contributor of articles in various industry publications. He's made TV appearances on the likes of CNBC and the Today Show, and he's been quoted in such national media outlets as the New York Post and Forbes magazine, among others. Prior to TABS, he was CEO of baby feeding supplier Binky Grip-Tite, and prior to that, he held a variety of marketing and trade marketing positions at Playtex Products. David Butcher has worked in a wide range of senior-level positions in sales, marketing, trade marketing, and category management, including most recently as Vice President of Marketing for Rembrandt Oral Care. Prior to that, Butcher's worked at Playtex Products for 13 years as Director of Field Sales and Director of Category Management and Trade Management, where he successfully restructured the sales organization to better align with top accounts and directed all broker sales, resulting in double-digit growth for the company. David began his career in the CPG industry at Procter & Gamble, working on the Jif brand sales team. So now I'm going to turn things over to our speakers. Dr. Jetta, please take it away.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for producing this continuation of the TABS Group webinar series. For those of you that are new to our webinars, we've been doing these webinars now for 2 years, about every other month, where we talk on topics of interest in the industry. And one thing that we do utilize quite often are consumer surveys using online survey methodology. And this is this powerhouse information tool that's very rarely utilized for quantitative type projects. You normally use surveys for qualitative, but the beauty of these types of surveys are they're fast, they're accurate, and they're inexpensive. If you get on our website and get on webinars.tabsgroup.com, you can get recordings of our past surveys and some of our webinars, and we talk about things such as best practices in trade promotion, best practices in analytics, and related to today's topics are we've done consumer value surveys in OTC, consumables, and we have 2 different annual vitamin studies similar to what we're seeing in cosmetics. What you'll see is that we take great pains to make sure that the survey data and the results that we're getting corroborate with external and more reliable data sources such as syndicated data or household panel data. And you're going to see the same thing in those surveys, and you'll see it as well here with some of the information Dave will take you through. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and he'll take you through all of the insights through this survey.
Excellent. Thanks, Kurt. I'm really happy to add beauty and cosmetics to the TABS webinar series. As we know, beauty is a huge business in the U.S. with very diverse consumer consumption and outlets for them to be able to go buy product. And the facts are a lot of those outlets are not being tracked by our syndicated data suppliers. While we obviously get the standard food, drug, mass, club, and dollar channels, we don't get a chance to look at the specialty beauty like Sephora, Ulta, Sally Beauty, or the salons, the in-home sales like Mary Kay and Avon, the department stores like Macy's, Bloomingdale, as well as we know what's going on in the online arena, the huge growth that we're seeing in the online arena. Now, today, get a click on here. There we go. I'm going to uncover insight into who's buying, for whom, what they're buying, where they're shopping, as well as we talked about the new trends. Now, there's enough information in here for me to probably spend an entire day going through the detail. But so today, in the interest of time, we have an hour. We're going to focus on an executive review of the key highlights and conclusions. One thing I invite you to do is to email us at webinar@tabsgroup.com, and then we can schedule a custom review. We can do a deeper dive into what segments, the cross-outlet purchase, some of the regionalities and state indices, as well as some major brand insight, understand department store brands versus the mass brands that we see out there, value and premium and so on. So as we go through the survey today. Now, the survey methodology, we looked at general population survey of 1,000 women, 18 to 74, as well as 250 men, and this is fielded in November. And we looked at the segments that they bought. We looked at 18 different segments. The outlets where they purchased the products, there was actually 15 different outlets. Purchase incidents across the new segments in BB creams and CC creams. Also the nail salon activity, importance of social media. We know we're getting a lot of information. Is this an important area for focus from a marketing standpoint, as well as brand awareness, favorability, and brands bought. Now again, just to reiterate, the brand data, we're not going to spend any time on brands today. There's just not enough time. So that's where I encourage you to send us an email. And then the last thing we do, as Kurt talked about, is we make sure and validate all of the information that's in there as far as tying it to the information we know to be true from the Nielsen and IRI syndicated data. Now, these are the segments. We've really focused on the segments that are in that typical retailer, that cosmetic area. We didn't focus, a lot of folks will say beauty includes fragrance, some of the face care, obviously makeup removers, but we wanted to focus really on that beauty, the color cosmetics, as well as we included the artificial nails and false eyelashes as a part of the information. Now, when we validated this, we looked at the percentage of women buying a particular segment, and in a category like this, where everything you'll notice a little bit later is they're buying very similar frequencies, and that should tie to the percentage of the units. And you can see very close correlation between the purchase household penetration as well as the purchase on the percentage of units. So let's talk about first the genders buying. Well, it's obvious that women would be the target demographic for cosmetics, with 86% of them stating that they bought cosmetics in the past year. But it's important that you don't turn your back on the non-target, which is men. 30% of men stated that they bought cosmetics in the past year. And we see this in a lot of categories where that not the obvious target can have a big impact on growth opportunities and expanding consumption. We just did a research on gluten-free products, and a lot of the purchasers that are buying gluten-free products don't even have celiac disease. So again, this is a similar situation here. 30% of men are buying. Now you ask, who are they buying for? Well, 26% of those are buying for themselves. Now, majority of them are buying for spouse or children or as gifts, someone else. But the bottom line is they still represent an opportunity to not turn your back on. When we look to women, not a surprise, 99% of women state that they buy cosmetics for themselves. But again, you can see that 6% are buying it for a spouse, as well as the children, the teens, and then the gifts as well. So now for the rest of the survey, I'm really going to focus on women. Obviously, that is the dominant consumer for the category. So all of the other charts that you'll see will be focusing on what the women respondents stated. But before I get into that, I wanted to follow up, as there was a lot of doom and gloom on the Black Friday. I wanted to share with some positive news coming forward. And what we see through unit consumption, that week before, the week of Christmas, and the week after Christmas, that cosmetic kits will sell nearly 3 times more than the average week during those particular periods. And you'll see that nail and lip also sees a significant increase in sales, probably to go to more evening events, or maybe they're buying them for stocking stuffers. Now, important to note is, and I can speak from personal experience, 50% of that increase is the actual week of Christmas. So you got last-minute shoppers running out to get either a stocking stuffer or a cosmetic gift of some sort. Make sure that you get everybody happy on Christmas. But what that does is displays are obviously a good idea. So make sure that you guys capitalize on the upcoming holiday time period. So let's talk about which segments they bought. So you can see here we've got mascara, all the eye makeup, foundation, face powder, concealer, blush, bronzer for face makeup, and then the nail beauty, which includes polish, treatment, nail kits, artificial nails, and then lip makeup, lipstick, gloss, liners, and gift sets. So we can see mascara is the highest penetration at 61%, followed by nail polish. What I also want you to point out is the amount of activity across a lot of these segments. You can see about 8 of these 18 segments are at about 40% or higher household penetration. So very high level of purchase. Now, one of the things that people look at when they're looking at categories, they want to understand that target demographic. And so they'll look at the total category and say, what percentage of the households that live in the Northeast buy a particular category to say, should I advertise in the Northeast? Now, with a category like this, where you have very fragmented segments, similar to vitamins, a better way to look at that target demographic is to look at depth of involvement. Now, when we're looking at depth of involvement, you're looking at the average number of segments bought. Now, for total women, the average number of segments bought was 7.2 segments. So out of all of those, mascara and so on, the average woman bought 7.2 segments. Now, when you look at the depth of involvement, you can see that the millennials are buying 9.8 segments on average. So they're very involved in this category. You can also see that the income bracket between 75 and 99 is also very involved in this bracket. Now, what I want to point out is, you might look at it and say, well, I'm surprised 100,000 to 149 is not really involved. Well, it's not that they're not really involved. They're buying more than the average. Most likely, too, when you look at some of the older, that 45 to 54, you say, well, wait a second. They're not buying that many. Well, most likely they're not experimenting. They're not trying different things. They know what they need, and they don't necessarily need to go buy 10 different types. They know what they're buying. They buy the 6 types, and they're happy, and they're done. So it's not that they're not involved. They're just not as involved as the others. So it shows you which demographic group you would want to focus on whenever you are really from a marketing effort standpoint. Now, the other thing you'll notice is Hispanics. They also index or have a high depth of involvement as far as 8.4 segments. What I want to talk about with Hispanics is anytime you see a survey, Hispanics, especially from a beauty, deals with shampoos, things like that, anything that has to do with beauty, Hispanics will always index high. So, and the reason for that is 72% of the Hispanic buyers in this survey are 44 years or younger, compared to the non-Hispanics at only 46%. So I am only saying this to caution you that don't go run out and completely change your advertising focus or change your planograms to where it's like only Hispanic or ethnic sections, or say, oh, we're going to only advertise for quinceañeras. They're important, but make sure that you just don't change everything. So now let's see how frequently they're buying. Again, on average, across all of those different segments, they buy 2.9 times per year. And what's interesting to note is they're buying pretty consistent across all segments. I mean, you don't have anything. It's not like you're seeing mascara, at 8 times a year, or you're seeing nail polish at 10 times a year. On average, they're buying pretty close to the same. And what that's telling you, too, is that you want to make sure that, from an advertising standpoint, or I should say from a featuring standpoint for the retailers, featuring full lines, because people are buying across multiple segments. So it's not one of those things, just feature foundation and they're going to come in and buy everything else at the same time. So keep that in mind from a trade promotion type standpoint. So now we know who and how often they're buying and what they're buying. Let's see where they're shopping. So now we've asked, and again, of the percentage of women, 57%, not a surprise, have bought any kind of cosmetics one time in Walmart. And that's, as you know, being the largest retailer, you're seeing that across all. But a couple things I wanted to point out is when you look at across the Target, Walgreens, and CVS, all at about that 30% rate, department store, what we hypothesize is that the department stores are very important for the cosmetics category, and they are. You can see at 24%. The other thing to look at is the in-home. That's your Mary Kay and your Avon. 14% is very high. When we do this for vitamins, we typically only see that in the 1 to 2% range. And then specialty, Sephora is the largest at 21%, followed by Ulta at 18%. So again, these are important outlets for cosmetic buyers. Now we want to get an idea of their loyalty. So asking them where they buy 3 or more times, realizing that they're going to buy at multiple outlets. And what you can see here is that 10 of these 15 outlets that we have here are over 50% stated loyalty. Now, Walmart typically has the highest loyalty, and the reason for that is they shop there the most frequently. The Walmart shopper will buy there anywhere from 30 to 35 times, whereas in Target or in the drugstores, they're only in there 6 to 8 to 9 times a year. So Walmart gets a bigger opportunity to get them to come back and buy again and again. But you can see the department stores are about the same as Target, as same as Sally or Sephora, as well as Ulta. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of cross-purchase to be able to understand, do they interact high, but I did want to mention a few. And that is that specialty beauty has a very high interaction with Target. The in-home has a very high interaction with Walmart. And then the cosmetic web has a very high interaction with department stores. So I just kind of wanted to point out those. And again, as we do the custom review, we can get into more detail across all of the different cross-purchase dynamics. So the next thing we wanted to do is to break the buyers up into heavy, medium, and light, to be able to understand that. And what we did is we segmented the heavy buyers purchased 10 segments or more, the medium buyers purchased 5 to 9 segments, and the light buyer purchases 1 to 4 segments. And what we found is 30% of the cosmetic buyers are heavy buyers, and they purchase nearly, or they make up nearly 58% of the purchases, about a 200 index. Now this is consistent. We've seen this across many different categories where instead of the old 80-20 rule, 30% of the heavy buyers will be buying 60% of the purchases. And you can see the light buyers are 30% and only make up 9%. Now one of the things we also find out in categories, and I'm going to show you a little more later, that will corroborate the statement that these light buyers can also have a bigger impact on category growth. Now, while they only represent 9%, if you could get them more involved, buy more often, more frequently, or maybe pick up more segments, anybody would be very happy in a category this size to be able to grow by 9%. So now, let's understand how those buyers are buying the different brands. Now, the heavy buyers purchase 4 times more brands than the light buyers. So you can see the light buyers, 2.3 brands. So of all of the different brands, the 18 brands that we included in there, on average 2.3. Now, where their stated loyalty, where they'll buy that brand 3 times or more, only 1. Look at the heavy. When you look at the heavy at 8.4 brands, average brands bought, and then 4.5, almost 5 brands, there really is no loyalty to heavy buyers. So, and that's always the thing from a marketing standpoint and from a manufacturing is how can I get them loyal to my brand? Well, because the category has so many different segments, people purchase across so many different segments, there is no real true loyalty. This isn't like just toothpaste where you only have one thing to buy. And what that says is you got people coming in and they're buying maybe MAC for mascara. They're buying L'Oreal for foundation, or they're buying Physicians Formula for bronzer. That's just 3 brands alone. We haven't even covered everything. We haven't even covered our nail part of the business. So what it's important to tell from a retailer standpoint is really to make sure that you have all the key brands and have that selection so you keep those buyers coming back before so they're not going and shopping other retailers. Because if you're missing some of the key brands and some of the segments, then you're missing a key opportunity for a heavy buyer. So now let's understand how those heavy buyers shopped by the outlet. Because obviously as a retailer, you're saying, I want a heavy buyer. I mean, granted, I have some good loyal buyers, but I want to make sure that I'm getting those heavy buyers that are buying twice what you would expect them to buy. Now, Walmart has the lowest percentage of their heavy buyers at 39%. Not a surprise, Sephora has the highest at 69%. And when you blend it across the channels to be able to get an idea of what's saying the food, drug, mass, club, and dollar at 47%, and to say, are we losing business to the beauty specialty, online, and department store? Well, the heavy buyers are already there. So it's not a function of saying, are we losing? They're already there. So it's not really necessarily lost, because one of the things that we see is that they're buying more brands, more segments, as well as they're buying in more outlets. So the next thing we want to understand about these heavy, medium, and light buyers is what are they paying for each of the different segments. So we looked at the key segments: foundation, face powder, lipstick, mascara, eyeshadow, eyeliner, and nail polish. We broke them into, we said, how much did you pay the last time you bought this? So we said less than $5, $5 to $9, $10 to $19. That really is your value, your mid-range, and your premium segments within the standard mass market, the food, drug, mass arena. Then you had the $20 to $29 and then the $30+ dollars. That really is your specialty beauty, your department stores, the other outlets. That's kind of your ultra premium. What we found is that buyers were willing to pay the most for foundation and face powder. You can see foundation, 17 on average. Again, this is a weighted average based on the number of people that said they bought in that particular area and a price point. You can see 17% said they bought 20 to 29%. 13% said they bought $30 or more, which got us to this weighted average of $17.18. Face powder, while it dominates in that $5 to $9 range at that 33% for your main program, you're still seeing 17% of that $20 to $29. It gets it to $14.99. Now you can understand why face powder and foundation would be more important as far as to go spend more money for. That is the foundation. I mean, that's the base of the makeup, and you really want to make sure that you make sure it looks natural. You have to love the Kardashians. But seriously, when you look at the numbers, 52% of nail polish buyers state they pay less than $5. You can see that down there. So the average is only $7.38. Now again, this is for nail polish. It doesn't include the kits that go along with it. And then as expected, the majority of the mentions are in that $5 to $9 or $10 to $19 range. And obviously that's where the biggest volume is being done in the food, drug, and mass arena. So now, what I did is I wanted to pull out nail. It's a little bit of an outlier from a standpoint of it's not the face cosmetics. It's heavily weighted towards the less than $5 range. So what I did is I grouped every other segment besides the nail to get an average price. And the average price people stated they paid was $12.40 for all of the different segments. And when you look across, as we saw before, the millennials are willing to spend 25% more for cosmetics. When you look across the different retailers, mass, not a surprise, is less. Drug, right on average. Beauty specialty, online and in-home is more. And then when you look at the department stores, as you would expect, nearly $20 they're paying across the different segments. So now let's talk about outlets of importance. Now, we do, as Kurt talked about, we do a lot of projection based to get an idea of how large categories are. We do this both in the U.S. as well as globally. And we have corroborated our conclusions with specific sales. Like on an example today, I actually took looking at the share of mentions. So the share of mentions really equates to the share of occasions. And when we talk about mentions, we're looking at the mentions that say that they bought there anytime, as well as bought there 3 or more times. And we have created an algorithm to be able to get to that share of occasions. This has been validated. Kurt, actually, if you wanted to get more detail, I won't go into as far as how that calculation is, but you can go to our website to get more insight as far as actually how that calculates. But what I did is I took the Walmart, the Target, the Walgreens, CVS. These are outlets I know about. Take this share of mentions and then bring it over to the syndicated data, and they're within 5% with the unit shares that they should be. So, I mean, pretty strong correlation. Now, with a category like cosmetics, where you have a pretty different dollars being spent by different outlets, you can't just sit there and say there's share of mentions, which is the share of occasions. And here, that would be basically your share of units. And you can see that the food, drug, mass, club, about 65% of the units that you'd be looking at. But you have to factor in, and when you're going to look at dollars, you have to factor in that they're willing to spend more money or going to spend more money at the department stores and the specialty. And so when you factor that in, that's where you get the projected share of dollars. So FDMCD is about 57%. That gets us to about $12.4 billion for the category. And again, this is cosmetics, so when you're looking at some of the others where they may be saying beauty, a lot of times they're including fragrance in there as well as shampoo. Now let's move on to some of the trends. So we look at nail salons. I wanted to find out what percentage of women are going to salons? Are they an opportunity to do something different? And 44% of women are getting their fingernails done. 42% are getting their toes done. 55 and 58, they're not going to the salon. You can see that about 20% are getting them done monthly or more frequently. And what I wanted to find out is, are they getting them done more this year than last year? And you can see it slightly, 31% to 26%. The reason why I wanted to look at that is we saw in the category where after the Great Recession of 2008, we saw in 2009, 10, all the way to last year, the category was getting double-digit indices as far as growth, up 10%, 20%. I was just surprised at that back-to-back year-over-year growth for a category that really isn't a new category. And what we hypothesized was that after the Great Recession, people started going to the salons less and doing more in-home. We also saw increases in distribution at all the retailers that also helped fuel that growth. But what we're seeing now is that that growth is starting to flatten out. And what's interesting to note here is, and we talked about those light buyers versus the heavy and so on. Look at the light buyers. 42% of the light buyers say they're going to the nail salons more this year than last year, almost twice than less. And then when you look at the all other, you can see it's almost a wash, 29% more to 27% less. So you can see the category is basically trending flat right now in FDNC. So it's one of those things that I just kind of wanted to point out the importance of those light buyers because they can really have an impact on category dynamics. So now let's look at the women that are getting their nails done monthly or more, and understand that demographic. And just as we saw in the others, the millennials, 35% versus that total women, which was 19%. Hispanic and black also indexed very high. And then you can also see that higher income, just as you would intuitively think 50% of the household women that are making $150,000 or more are double what you would expect it to be at 19%. The other high index I wanted to point out was the Northeast with a 151, as well as the low index in the Midwest. And the Midwest, I'm sure there's a component of they don't get a chance to show the feet as much because the weather is a little colder. Obviously, with wearing gloves, they probably have the same similar situation. But I also wanted to point out that depth of involvement again. Women going to salons, it's not that, well, they're not in the stores anymore. No, they're actually very involved, buying 9.7 segments. So again, still an important consumer. So let's move on to the BB creams and CC creams. Now, for you that aren't aware, BB cream stands for Beauty Balm Blemish Balm. And it's really all-in-one face makeup to replace the primer, foundation, and it also typically includes sunblock. Now, CC creams is short for color control or color correcting. They address issues like redness. They also have more anti-aging properties. So let's understand what's going there. Well, as you would expect, they skew very young because those are the girls that are, or the women that are involved and they're willing to try new things. It also skews to a $75,000 to $99,000 income group. What's really important to note here is 59% of women stating they are buying more BB cream and CC creams this year than last year. So this really does bode well for the projected growth for 2015 for these particular items. Now I want to look at shopping attitudes. We asked them to get some psychographic information to understand, like, how do you shop and what's important to you? Well, it's unanimous. Women prefer to shop for cosmetics at stores that offer good deals. So it's one of those things where just having an everyday low price or not promoting, it's one of those things where they are actively looking for deals. Now, when you look at the heavy buyer, they like to spend a lot of time in front of that section to find the right product and color. They also are willing to indulge by spending over $20 from time to time on expensive makeup. And when you understand and look at the light buyer, not many are going to do that. And in fact, looking at that light buyer, those are the ones that are keeping their brands to 1 to 2. And you see, this actually is corroborated by the chart we saw before, where on the light buyers, the average number of brands bought regularly was 1. So it corroborates more information there. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is prefer to shop for cosmetics at stores with beauty advisors. Now, that's something that we see the drug chains doing, is adding beauty advisors, obviously looking at it as possibly an opportunity to provide the similar service that the department stores have. But you can see it's not a huge important act from across the buying group. But what I did want to point out is the department stores, those numbers, as well as Sephora, those numbers jumped to 30% or 32% and 36%. So that's why they're going there, is they do understand they have those beauty advisors, but it's not as important overall. So let's look at social media. So 30% of all category buyers state that any type of social media is very important. Basically, I asked them, how important is this item or this social media venue in helping you choose what product that you're going to buy. And we asked them if it was very important or not important. And for you that aren't familiar with some of these icons, go down the list. This is just a blog. This is a standard icon for blogging. So we're looking at the cosmetic blogs. When you look at the next one down, this is YouTube. Facebook is pretty straightforward. Most folks know Facebook. This is Pinterest. The next one down is Instagram. And then the last one is Twitter. Now you can see that the cosmetic blogs and the YouTubes get the most mentions. And if you go on YouTube and you just typed in how to makeup or makeup review, you're going to get 2.2 million views or 2.2 million different videos you could watch. So you have women that are opening up products, showing them how to use it, and women are going there to understand and get a little insight and review before they actually will go investigate and buy. And you can see, look at the difference of the heavy buyers on blogs as well as YouTube. Almost 30% say it's very important, and they go to the cosmetic blogs. Now, 61% of the respondents are 18 to 34. Not a surprise. We already know that they're heavily involved in the category compared to 31% for all. So that's a double to what you would expect. Again, very involved. They're buying 10.5 types. They buy in more outlets. They spend more. They buy more brands. They index at 150. But surprisingly enough, they don't buy more Maybelline than you would expect, or CoverGirl than you expect, Revlon or Sally Hansen. And then lastly, they are 2.5 times more likely to go to a nail salon. So some of the conclusions. Cosmetic sales are huge, over $12 billion with a very fragmented outlet purchases. 86% of women bought cosmetics in the last year. But again, do not forget about men. That's 30% stating that they bought cosmetics last year. So from an advertising standpoint, doesn't mean it's a bad thing to throw a cosmetic commercial on an ESPN show. For women, cosmetics 18 to 34 really is that heavy involvement, 75,000 to 99,000, and Hispanics are also very involved. Cosmetic purchases, they purchase many segments. Now, what does that say? As well as consistent frequency. Full-line promotions are going to be more effective and will deliver a better ROI for the manufacturers who are looking to improve trade promotion ROI. Capitalize on those upcoming holiday boost in sales. And remember, all buyers prefer to shop at stores that have good deals. Now, the heavy buyers, while they're 30% of total buyers, they account for 58% of the purchases. And these buyers are committed to the category. They're purchasing more segments, shopping, buying more brands. Remember, you don't have the brand loyalty. They're buying a lot. And really, it's important is to look at those light buyers because they can really have more impact on category growth as they increase involvement or simply return to the category. 59% BB cream and CC cream buyers stated that they're buying more this year than last year. So it does indicate that this is a good segment and poised for solid growth in 2015. Now, over 40% of the women are getting their nails done. Twice as many light buyers are getting them done more frequently this year than last year. So it's, again, understanding what that translates from a consumption standpoint. And then 30% of buyers feel that social media is very important and focusing on the cosmetic blog and YouTube. So as you can see, it took quite a bit of time, and we didn't actually get into all of the brands and the cross-purchase and so on. So we really do invite you to email us at webinar@tabsgroup.com to schedule a custom deep dive where we can focus on the brands you really are wanting to look at, or the retailers that you're wanting to look at, or maybe the demographic groups that you're wanting to dig into. The other thing I want to point out is Kurt talked about every 2 months we do this. Kurt's going to be doing a shopper behavior study to look at some of those promotions on how are they actively purchasing using different promotion types. Also, like to invite you to follow us on Twitter. You can look at tabsgroup.com as well as at tabsgroup, at Kurt Jetta. And then we've also are starting a hashtag, tabsgroupbeauty. So if you have any questions or comments, or if you wanted to just kind of engage in conversation via Twitter, hashtag tabsgroupbeauty, and then also on LinkedIn at tabsgroup. So that will end our review for today. So thank you very much, and I would like to pass it back to Rob so we get into some of the Q&A.
Great presentation, David. And yeah, let's jump into the questions. Our first question, can you tell us a little bit about the demographic profile for the women non-buyers of cosmetics?
Yeah, the non-buyers actually index very high to the less than $25,000 range. They actually index at about 200 versus the what you would expect them to be. They also 45 to 64 when had a 158 index versus what you would expect them to be. And then lastly was the Midwest. So less than $25,000, 45 to 64 years old, and in the Midwest.
Okay. David, here's another one. What's the number of outlets that heavy, medium, and light buyers shop at?
That's a good question. As you saw when we were talking about the brands, where they were buying 8 brands and then 4.5 are they're loyal to. When you look at the different retailers to say, okay, they bought it one time. The light buyer was 1.9, the medium buyer was 3.2, and the heavy buyer was 5.4 outlets. So you can see they're buying a lot of outlets. When we said, where do you buy there regularly, those heavy buyers where they buy 5.4, 3.2 outlets they shop at regularly. So they're in a lot of places versus only 1 for the light buyer and then basically 2 for the medium buyer.
Okay. Here's one more. David, can you talk about the roles that natural and sustainability are playing in the cosmetics business for, nail, face, and eye?
As far as meaning in packaging, or because the natural, if you're looking at like the natural or organic type cosmetics, right, or are you looking more from a standpoint of the packaging as far as that type of thing?
Well, unfortunately, the audience member didn't specify, but let's start with the ingredients, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I can speak to that, Dave.
Yeah. Now, what we see in the standard food, drug, mass arena, the organic / natural is about 2 to 3% of sales. So it's not something that the consumers are migrating to. But we also are seeing that people are migrating to mineral cosmetics, which is a much more natural type product, as well as we're seeing a growth in excitement for argan oils and things like that. So they are getting their natural products through other than just a blatant, I'm buying an organic natural product, if that makes sense.
Okay, and I think that actually does speak to the our panelists. Our audience member actually did clarify, and they were speaking specifically from a positioning benefits standpoint, which I believe you addressed.
Yeah.
Next question. One of our audience members was wondering if you also included home shopping channels such as QVC in your data.
That we asked them to list other channels or other outlets that they bought. QVC was the dominant mention in the other. Now, the other was not a high percentage. We're only talking about 1% total across all other. But QVC was a heavy mention in that other channel or other outlet. Yes.
Okay. And I think, guys, do we have time for one more? I think we have time for one last one. The question is, how is consumer lifestyle psychographics playing a role in driving the cosmetics category versus that of demographics?
As far as whether they work or not, I mean, can you be more specific?
Yeah.
Actually, let me take that, Dave.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, let me take that, because, I mean, that was one of the things when I looked at the data that really popped out at me. Other than that, Dave's chart on the number of brands bought, whether I was just, astounded by, but is the sharp difference in kind of the overall involvement and engagement and the emotional attachment to the category of heavy buyers. So those qualitative / psychographic factors do play a much more significant role in purchase behavior than the pure demographics. Now the question is the real interesting insights, which we didn't, unfortunately, just didn't have the time within the budget of the survey framework, is to really probe that. But kind of the I like to indulge myself question, you saw the difference, the heavy buyers said, over 50%, the light buyers were 10. Same thing about the amount of time they like to just sit in front of the shelf and shop for just the right product. I mean, there's some real insights there once you can get into their head on, on their motivations there, because you rarely in survey data see that stark of a differentiation between buyer groups.
Okay. We have one more question here, and there's one of our audience members was wondering what the average cost for a custom report would be. So if you guys were going to do a custom report, I guess what would that cost?
Well, it really depends. Go ahead, Kurt. I'll let you handle that.
No, I mean, it would
How about
vary.
that for a direct question?
Yeah, it would vary between a low of 5,000 to a high of 50,000. The average would probably be in the neighborhood of 15 to 20, but it would be varied on where you really wanted to probe. Do you want to probe on the information on brands, on retailers, all the above? So, I mean, I'm sure you can hopefully appreciate the, all the different elements that we could bring to bear, but kind of wrap your mind around a 15 to 20 range. Now, the offer that Dave put out there on the customized review would not be that. It would be significantly lower, just because we have kind of a standard message we would want to bring forward, but if there was some variation or follow-up on that, then you'd be talking additional.
Okay. We did have, I have one more, we have time for one more question. There was one that's in the queue that I'll just direct to all of our audience members. Someone was requesting how they get a hard copy of the presentation. We would follow up. I would request that you follow up directly with the folks at the TABS group. Their emails are, they'll give you an email address as we're ready to sign off. But actually, you know what? Let's just ask that now.
Webinar at tabsgroup.com.
Yeah, you can just do the webinar. Thank you.
Webinar at tabsgroup.com,
correct.
Okay. All right, and here's our last question, guys. Thanks very much for your patience and your participation today. The number of purchases / store visits look pretty similar across demographics. How do you explain that? Do they buy in kits across segments? I guess the question again was the number of purchases / store visits look pretty similar across demographics. I guess the first question was, how do you explain that?
They're just very involved. I mean, it's one of those things when you're going through that group. And again, when we go into the deep dive, we'll start looking at the different outlets of each one of those, the buying groups that we looked at to see what they're into. But when you look at it in aggregate, that it's a category with so many segments and so many different brands that consumers are out shopping, looking for opportunities to buy product.
I mean, and that's a great segue into the February webinar where we'll actually be getting into that. I mean, we have several hypotheses. One is what is the role of dealing in being a catalyst for people bouncing around to so many outlets, because that's really an extreme level. I mean, it's way more than what we were seeing in vitamins. And so we'll get into those types of factors in February.
Okay.
Okay. Well, one comment from the audience that this was an excellent presentation, so we'll let that be the final word for the day. For those of you in the audience, as I've just found out, our presenters will also be following up with a direct mailer to everyone who is on the webinar today with a link back to the presentation to make it easy for you. If we weren't able to get to your questions today, they are in the queue. We have your email addresses. Our presenters will get back to you. And on behalf of the TABS group, our presenters today, and the editors and publishers of Drugstore News, I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar. Remember, if you missed any portion of the presentation, you can go to drugstorenews.com and view the on-demand version. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day and a great holiday season.